What happened when Ukrainian drones struck Russia's $1.2 billion Moscow city towers and the fiery explosions lit up the heart of the capital was more than just another headline in a long and brutal war. The glittering skyscrapers, once symbols of Russian wealth and modern power, suddenly became fragile giants shuddering under the force of unmanned aircraft that slipped past Moscow's defenses. The impact rattled not only the glass and steel, but the very confidence of a nation that had long declared its capital untouchable. That night, as smoke curled above the towers and alarms echoed through empty streets, ordinary citizens realized the war they had watched from a distance had come crashing into their own backyard. Panic spread across Moscow in waves. Sirens wailed as fire crews and emergency services rushed to the scene, their flashing lights reflecting off shattered windows. Residents scrambled down stairwells in their nightclothes, clutching children and belongings, while others stood frozen at the sight of flames licking the skyline. For years, Moscow's leadership had promised them security, had assured them that the chaos of war would never breach the city's glittering skyline. Yet now, drones had cut through those promises as easily as they had pierced the glass of the towers. The Russian media scrambled to control the narrative, first downplaying the incident as minor damage and successful defense, while images and videos flooded social media showing broken facades and terrified crowds. The contrast was undeniable. Official statements painted calm, but the streets of Moscow told a story of fear and disbelief. Analysts abroad immediately recognized the symbolism. Ukraine had struck not just a target of economic importance, but one of psychological dominance, proving that nowhere, not even the billion-dollar heart of Moscow, was immune. Inside Ukraine, news of the strike spread like wildfire. Soldiers on the front lines passed phones around, watching the clips with exhausted but triumphant smiles. For them, it was not just about damaging towers. It was proof that their resistance carried weight, that their reach extended far beyond trenches and ruined villages. In Kyiv, ordinary citizens shared the videos with a sense of grim pride. They knew retaliation would come, but for a brief moment, the narrative had shifted. The mighty capital of Russia had been shaken by the hands of those fighting for survival. The Kremlin's response was swift and angry. Military officials vowed consequences and ordered heightened air defenses around major cities. Checkpoints tightened. Anti-aircraft guns were repositioned, and Moscow residents were told to expect stricter security measures. Yet for many Russians, the damage was already done. If drones could strike Moscow's financial core once, they could do it again. Trust in their government's assurances of safety fractured further with every whispered rumor of the next attack. Internationally, the images of the burning towers sparked debates in every major capital. Some condemned Ukraine for escalating the conflict, while others defended it as a legitimate strike against Russia's symbols of power. Military experts analyzed the footage frame by frame, pointing out the precision of the attack, speculating on how drones had managed to evade Moscow's dense air defense systems. To the watching world, the strike wasn't just about buildings. It was about shifting momentum in a war that had dragged on longer than many expected. For the Russian elite who owned offices in those towers, the attack was personal. Billionaires and officials alike received phone calls in the dead of night, learning their glass-walled conference rooms and luxury apartments had been torn open. Some fled the city quietly, sending families abroad. Others demanded the government take harsher measures against Ukraine, their outrage fueled by a rare taste of vulnerability. The illusion of Moscow's untouchable wealth had cracked, and once cracks appear, they tend to spread. On the ground near the towers, ordinary Muscovites gathered to watch the smoldering skyline. Some filmed nervously, others whispered prayers, and a few dared to voice the fear everyone felt. If drones could reach here, what came next? The silence of the admiral during Clara's scars was mirrored now by the silence of citizens staring at broken glass. A silence heavy with the knowledge that their world had changed overnight. In Kyiv, Clara's story would never be told, but the same truth she carried with her applied here too. Courage and sacrifice come at unexpected moments, and they can shake the strongest of adversaries. The drones were not just machines. They were messengers of defiance, whispering to both sides that the war was far from over. And as Moscow repaired its broken towers, as propaganda tried to patch the cracks in confidence, one fact remained undeniable. The strike had pierced more than steel and glass. It had struck at the very heart of Russian certainty, leaving scars on the city's pride that no amount of reconstruction could erase. Through the following days, Moscow became a city on edge. The once bustling streets of the financial district felt different, quieter, tense, as if everyone was waiting for the next explosion. Office workers returned reluctantly, their eyes darting toward the sky each time they heard the faint buzz of an aircraft. The towers themselves, though quickly patched and cordoned off, still bore the marks of the attack. Cracked glass and blackened walls stood as silent reminders that the war had come knocking on the capital's door. And no amount of official reassurance could erase that reality. Behind closed doors, Russian officials scrambled to craft a narrative that would calm the public while preserving the image of strength. Emergency meetings stretched late into the night, with generals presenting plans to reinforce Moscow's air defenses and intelligence chiefs scouring for answers as to how the drones had slipped through. The Kremlin, however, understood something far more dangerous than physical damage had been inflicted. The strike had punctured the aura of invulnerability that Moscow had cultivated for decades. Meanwhile, in Kyiv, the strike became more than just a military success. It was a symbol of survival and resistance. On the streets, people spoke about it with hushed pride, balancing their joy with the knowledge that retaliation was inevitable. Parents whispered about it at kitchen tables, soldiers joked about it in muddy trenches, and even children repeated the story with wide-eyed excitement. For a nation that had endured countless nights of bombardment, the image of Moscow burning was a rare glimpse of power shifting, however briefly, into their hands. The global response only intensified the impact. News anchors replayed the videos endlessly, showing the skyline of Moscow scarred and smoking. Analysts debated the reach of Ukrainian drone technology, questioning whether this strike was a one-time message or the beginning of a new phase in the war. Western capitals privately applauded the precision and boldness, while also worrying about how far Russia might go in retaliation. Every headline reinforced the same idea. The war was no longer confined to Ukraine's battered towns and fields. It had reached the symbolic core of Russia itself. On social media, the footage took on a life of its own. Memes, commentaries, and raw videos spread across platforms faster than officials could censor them. The Russian public saw what the Kremlin wanted to hide. Not just broken windows, but broken pride. Comments flooded in, some angry, some fearful, some quietly admitting what had once been unthinkable. For the first time, ordinary Russians were forced to confront the fact that the war wasn't just something happening beyond their borders. It was right above their heads, and it could return at any moment. For the wealthy and powerful who had invested billions into the Moscow city towers, the strike was a humiliation they couldn't ignore. Boardrooms filled with whispered fury, investors threatened to pull out, and some of the richest families quietly moved their loved ones out of the country. Moscow, once sold as a safe haven for wealth and luxury, now felt exposed. If towers worth over $1 billion could be struck, what else was vulnerable? The question lingered in every conversation, poisoning the air with unease. The admiral's silence at Clara's scars mirrored Moscow's silence now. The towers, though patched and cleaned, seemed to stand differently, less like untouchable monuments of power and more like fragile giants scarred by defiance. And just as Clara's wounds had spoken louder than words, the blackened steel of Moscow's skyline carried its own message. This war was not distant, And it would not be contained, as Russian state television broadcast footage of repairs and calm officials assuring the public that everything was under control. Whispers told another story. People swapped rumors of new drone sightings, of defenses overwhelmed, of officials too frightened to admit how easily Moscow had been reached. Confidence eroded quietly, day by day, and though no one dared say it openly, the city was living under a shadow it had never known before. Ukraine, on the other hand, embraced the symbolism. Politicians reminded the world that if Moscow's billion-dollar skyline could burn, then no fortress of aggression was beyond reach. Soldiers took courage from it, volunteers found new determination, and citizens, though weary from endless blackouts and bombardments, stood a little taller. The strike had not ended the war, but it had redrawn its map, proving that the powerful could bleed, and in that realization, both nations found themselves changed. For Russia, it was the dawning fear that the war could no longer be hidden or controlled. For Ukraine, it was a surge of resolve that the impossible was not beyond them.